here for a second, all right? We haven't run in the top 10 in like 3 years. We're having a great day here today. Keep it together. I know it's not perfect. Just keep your together, and we're going to have a good day.
And what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Historic Hot Laps. This week, we're getting closer to the Indy 500, and the first real clues are starting to show. The open test at Indianapolis is in the books, and the mix of veterans, one-off entries, and rising talent is already setting up what could be one of the deepest fields that we've seen in years. Meanwhile, Texas gave us chaos across NASCAR, big names stepping up in high-limit racing, and in Formula One, a new star might officially be taking control of the sport. And to close it out, we're diving into the story of a man who helped shape what the Indy 500 is today, and that's Andy Granatelli. All of that coming up right now. All right, let's kick things off something a little different this week. No race, but honestly, one of the most important events of the year, and that's the 2020 500 Open Test. It's officially in the books, and if you're looking for early indicators of who's going to be fast in May, this is where it starts. 2 days at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, 33 cars expected. You have veterans, you've got rookies, you've got one-off entries, which are also somewhat veterans, all trying to figure out what they've got before the month of May really kicks off. So let's talk about day one right away. Day one told us a very clear story. Experience still matters at Indy. It was Connor Daly at the top of the charts, laying down a 225.3 mile an hour lap time late in the session. And look at the names that came up behind him. You had Helio Castroneves, 4-time winner, Takuma Sato, 2-time winner, Scott Dixon, also a winner, Alexander Rossi, a winner. I mean, that's basically a greatest hits list of Indy 500 experience. So right away, the takeaway is pretty simple. These veterans still know how to find speed at this place, but the bigger storyline here is Daly is a one-off entry with Dreyer Reinbold Racing, and every single year he shows up at Indy and is immediately competitive. The team that doesn't run a full season, but they always show up ready for the 500. So let's talk about some other stuff to watch, and that's where the test gets really interesting because Indy isn't just about the full-time grid, it's about who shows up just for this race. You've got Helio Castroneves continuing his part-time Indy-only presence, veteran return programs with Dreyer Reinbold and Daly like we discussed, and drivers going through refresher rookie programs just trying to get cleared. We even saw a few hiccups during the open test. Roman Grosjean had a bizarre moment hitting a bird during testing, which is about the most IndyCar thing imaginable. Then you have drivers like Catherine Legge dealing with issues that limited her running early. Another reminder that getting the laps in at Indy is very critical. Then we get to day two, and the script flips completely. Now it's the younger drivers, and specifically the rookies that are stealing the spotlight. Kyle Larson goes to the top of the overall charts with a 226 mile an hour lap time, the fastest of the entire test. And yes, there is an asterisk here because that lap did come with a tow, but still, 226 at an open test in Indy in your first time is no joke. He was one of the only two drivers to break a 226 mile an hour barrier, the other being Joseph Newgarden, who also showed serious speed, no surprise there. And upsettingly, I'm sure that wasn't even their oval car that they were using. So now the narrative shifts a little bit. Day one was the veterans, day two was the younger talent and raw speeds, and a bunch of drafting runs. So what do we actually learn from the test? Well, number one, don't overreact to the speed charts. A lot of these laps are draft assisted and teams are working through completely different programs. There are still a few real signals here. Veterans are going to be a problem again with Daly, Castroneves, Dixon, the names that don't ever go anywhere, right? They're always up front. One-off teams are legit threats with Dreyer Reinbold showing speed immediately and Daly back behind the wheel for them. And rookies aren't just showing up, they're also fast with that AJ Foyt Racing of Colette topping the test. That's a statement, even if it is with a tow, because a lot of cars were out there with a tow that weren't pulling those speeds. And maybe, and most importantly, the field feels very deep this year. There's no obvious favorite yet, and that's exactly what you want heading into the Indy 500. And the best part of this is just the warm-up. The real story starts when we get into qualifying and race trim in a couple weeks, because that's when the games stop. We find out who is actually going to have a shot to win the Indy 500. And yeah, we'll just keep you updated as we go. All right, let's get into things from the weekend in Texas. And Texas Motor Speedway delivered a little bit of everything. You had speed, you had chaos, you had strategy calls, you had late race restarts, pretty much the full NASCAR experience across all three series. So let's go in order with Truck Series, O'Reilly Series, and then we'll finish it off with the Cup race. We'll start with the Truck Series on Friday night. If you watched Trucks at Texas before, you know what you're in for. The track has a way of turning races into survival contests, and that's exactly what we got. Carson Hocevar comes away with the win, but that doesn't even begin to tell the story of how this race played out. Early on, you had a handful of drivers showing real speed. Guys willing to run the top lane, searching for grip, trying to build momentum. But Texas is one of those places where the line between fast and out of control is very thin. And as the race went on, that started to show. We saw multiple cautions stack up through the middle portion of the race, some smaller incidents, some bigger ones, but all of them doing the same thing, resetting the field. And every restart at Texas in the trucks feels like a gamble. 3 wide, sometimes 4 wide into turn 1. Guys forcing the issue because track position matters so much. One of the bigger moments came from a multi-truck incident that took out several contenders and completely reshuffled the running order. So now you've got to get into the final stage, and it's less about who had the fastest truck early and more about who's still there. And that's where Hocevar really shines. He puts himself in the right position late, manages the restart cleanly, which is easier said than done at Texas. And when the opportunity opens up, he takes it. The final run becomes all about control, no mistakes, no overdriving the corner, no getting caught in someone else's mess, and Hocevar executes. It's a gritty win, and honestly one that says a lot about where he's at right now as a driver, because winning in trucks at Texas isn't just about speed, it's about awareness, patience, and knowing when to go. Then we roll into Saturday, and this one has a little different feel. The O'Reilly Series race had a bit more rhythm early on, but it didn't stay that way because the headline here, Kyle Larson shows up and Kyle Larson wins. And anytime Larson drops into one of these races, it changes that dynamic immediately. Now, suddenly it's not just about the regular contenders, it's about whether anyone can actually beat him. Early in the race, though, it wasn't Larson controlling things. Justin Allgaier looked incredibly strong. He qualified well, he controlled the clean air, and he really set the pace through the opening stages. You also had Sam Mayer right there in the mix, keeping pressure on the front group. And for a while, it felt like this might turn into a more straightforward race, but Texas doesn't usually allow that. And as we get deeper into the race, cautions started to creep in, cautions breeding cautions, nothing overly massive, but enough to keep resetting the strategy and bringing the field back together. That's when Larson starts to come alive. You could see him working different lines, moving around the track, and finding speed where others weren't. And that's kind of his signature. He doesn't just drive the car fast, he adapts faster than anyone else. Late in the race, it becomes a track position battle, pit strategy, restart execution, timing everything perfectly. Allgaier's still right there, Mayer's still in the fight, but Larson gets himself where he needs to be. When it comes down to the final run, he just executes better. He gets clear when it matters, he manages the pressure behind him and closes it all out. It's one of those wins where it might not look like a dominant thing on paper, but if you watch the race, you realize he controlled the moment. And again, it reinforces something we already know, and that's Larson can jump into anything, anywhere, and be a threat to win. Meanwhile, behind him, the continued emergence of younger drivers is worth watching. You've got guys consistently showing speed, running up front, gaining experience, and that's quietly becoming one of the bigger stories in the series. And then we get to Sunday, the Cup Series. And this one felt like a proper Texas heavyweight fight. From the start, there was no single driver just running away with it. Instead, it was a rotation of contenders, different pit strategies, different lines working at different times, and a lot of drivers taking turns to the front. Chase Elliott, though, was one of the constants in this race. He had speed early, he stayed in the mix all day, and most importantly, kept himself in position. That's the key at a place like Texas because the race wasn't going to be decided in stage 1 or stage 2. It's always going to come down to the final run. We saw multiple leaders throughout the race, and a ton of movement in the top 10 as strategies played out. Some drivers gambled on track position, others focused on tire life, and all that set the stage for what we got late. A caution that bunches the field back up and turns us into a sprint. Now it's a restart race, and this is where everything changes because now it's not about long run speed anymore. It's about launch, positioning, and who can be aggressive without overdoing it. Elliott nails the restart, gets the jump he needs, clears enough traffic to control the lane, and from there, it's all about holding off the pressure. Denny Hamlin right there behind him. Alex Bowman was in the mix as well, but Elliott doesn't crack, and he hits his marks. He doesn't give up the preferred line and manages those final laps perfectly. And that's what stands out about this as a win for him. It wasn't handed to him. He had to execute under pressure in a chaotic finish against top-tier competition. Behind them, the race told a bigger story too. We saw a lot of strong cars taken out of contention, whether through incident strategy, misfires, or just getting caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And that's Texas for you. It rewards aggression, but it also punishes mistakes immediately. So when you step back to look at the whole weekend from Texas, there's a pretty clear theme across all 3 series, and that's execution beats speed when it matters most. Hocevar survives and capitalizes late. Larson adapts and takes control when it counts. And Elliott delivers a pressure-packed finish. The other big takeaway, Texas continues to be unpredictable. You can have the fastest vehicle, but if you don't manage your restarts, avoid trouble, and make the right calls late, it doesn't matter. All right, before we move on from Texas, we've got to talk about one of the most exciting things happening in dirt racing right now, and that's the High Limit Racing Series. And their stop in Texas this weekend absolutely delivered. This was kind of a double-header deal with NASCAR. It wasn't, like the IndyCar one, but still kind of tied together there. But this wasn't just another race. It felt like a statement weekend for the series, the drivers, and honestly, the level of competition they're building right now. So now, if you've been following high limit season at all this season, you already know the vibe. You got big names, big money, and drivers that aren't afraid to throw it in there. And Texas, especially on the dirt, has a way of amplifying that. The track slicks off, the cushion builds, and suddenly you've got multiple lanes, multiple strategies, and a whole lot of opportunity to make a move or make a mistake. Let's get with night one, and no surprise here, Kyle Larson comes out swinging and picks up the win. But this wasn't just a show up and dominate kind of night. Larson had to work through traffic, manage changing track conditions, and deal with pressure from some seriously strong competition behind him. Early in the race, you had a tight battle to the front, multiple drivers trading lines, feeling out wherever the speed was. As the track started to transition, the top groove definitely came in, the bottom started to slick off, and that's where Larson really started to separate himself from the rest of the field. Because when the track gets technical like that, he's one of the best in the world at adapting quickly. He finds grip when others can't, times his moves perfectly in traffic, and once he gets clean air, he's incredibly hard to beat. Behind him, though, the story is just how competitive the field looked. You had guys like Brad Sweet and Tyler Courtney right there in the mix, keeping the pressure on and showing that this isn't just a one-driver show. But on night one, Larson executes, manages the race, and takes the win. Then we get into night two. And this is where the weekend really gets interesting because instead of a repeat, we get a completely different kind of race. Track conditions changed again. You had less grip early, slicker surface, and a much bigger emphasis on throttle control and patience. And that opens up the door for someone else to step up. Brad Sweet comes back to get a win on night two. And this one felt like a grinder. It was not flashy. It was not dominant, just smart, controlled, and consistent. Sweet puts himself in position early and avoids mistakes. And when others started to slip up, he capitalized. And that's something that really stands out with him, especially in a series like High Limit. He doesn't always have to be the most aggressive guy on track. He just has to be the smartest over the course of the race. Behind him, again, the competition was tight. Larson's still in the mix. Other contenders pushing hard, trying different lines, searching for speed. But Texas made it tough to pass late. And Sweet did exactly what he needed to do, and that was lock it down. So when you look at the full High Limit weekend in Texas, a couple big things stand out. First, the level of competition at High Limit is legit. There isn't a small field, predictable series. You've got elite level drivers showing up every single night, and results are starting to reflect that in the depth. Secondly, the track conditions played a huge role into the weekend there. Night one and night two were completely different races, and the drivers who adapted the quickest were the ones fighting for the wins. And third, Larson versus Sweet continues to feel like a headline rivalry here. Two different styles, two different approaches, and both getting results, and not to mention their family, right? So why this matters? Well, zoom out for a second here, because this is exactly what High Limit Racing is trying to build. They're trying to build these big shows with recognizable names and races that feel important. Weekends like this, you've got multiple winners, competitive fields, and unpredictable outcomes. That's how you grow a series. All right, let's jump over to Formula One because the 2026 Miami Grand Prix gave us a little bit of everything. You had strategy battles, rising stars, controversy with the regulations. The race had actually had some real tension all the way to the end. So coming into Miami, there are already a lot of questions surrounding Formula One this season with the new regulations, new engine dynamics, and a lot of drivers openly saying the racing just hasn't quite felt right. So heading into the weekend, there's a lot of attention not just on who would win, but whether the racing itself was actually improving. Miami gave us a pretty solid test of that. Let's start with Saturday with the sprint race. It was Lando Norris taking the win from McLaren, clean start, controlled race, and honestly pretty dominant once he got out front. Oscar Piastri followed him home for McLaren 1-2 in the sprint. I wish I would have put some money on that one. But with Charles Leclerc in third, at that point it kind of felt like, all right, McLaren might be the team to beat this weekend. Then we go into Sunday, and this is where the real story begins because once again, it's Kimi Antonelli stealing the show. The 19-year-old continues his unreal start to the season and wins the Miami Grand Prix in his third straight victory. And this wasn't an easy one. This was somewhat of a fight. Right from the start, things got messy. Antonelli, Verstappen, and Leclerc all battling in turn one, locking up, fighting for position, and immediately setting the tone for the race. Not long after, Verstappen had a spin, drops down in the order, and suddenly one of the early favorites is on the back foot. We also get an early safety car after a crash involving Hajar and Gasly. So right away, strategy starts to come into play. So let's talk about how this race was won. And this is where the race really gets interesting because this one wasn't decided purely on track. It was decided a lot on pit lane. At one point, Norris actually takes the lead on track and looks like he might control the race, but Mercedes pulls the trigger on the undercut move. Antonelli pits earlier, gets clean air, puts in the laps, and jumps Norris on the cycle as it plays out, and that was the move. From there, it was a long, tense battle between Antonelli and Norris. For basically the final third of the race, there was a hard battle. Norris is right there within a few seconds, sometimes closer, pushing, waiting, looking for any mistake. But Antonelli didn't crack, even at the young age he's got. And that's what was so impressive about him. He's not just fast, he keeps it calm. He manages his tires, he manages his energy deployment, and defends without overdriving the car. And at 19 years old, that's not a normal thing. He brings it home for the win, with Norris finishing second and Piastri completing the podium out. You also had George Russell in the Mercedes coming in fourth, Max Verstappen in fifth, Lewis Hamilton sixth, Franco Colapinto in the Alpine in seventh, Charles Leclerc in eighth, Carlos Sainz in ninth, and Alex Albon from Williams in 10th as well. So Williams getting 2 cars in the points, so that's awesome to see. Worth noting is Leclerc actually had a late race incident and penalty that dropped him down in the order and what looks like a podium contender early on. Let's just say it very clearly, Antonelli isn't a future star anymore. He's here, 3 straight wins, championship leader, and beating established drivers like Norris and Verstappen straight up, and maybe that's the most impressive part. He's doing it, not panicking, no big mistakes, just clean, calculated racing. So now we got to talk about the elephant in the room for F1 this weekend, and that's the FIA changes we mentioned on a previous episode. Because Formula One did tweak the regulations coming into Miami, specifically around energy deployment and this whole super clipping issue. So quick breakdown on that. Reduced energy harvesting limits in certain situations, adjusted deployment zones, tried to smooth out those weird speed differences on straights. Basically, the goal was simple, make the racing safer and hopefully feel more natural. So did it honestly help? Well, a little, but not completely. What we saw in Miami was better in terms of wheel-to-wheel racing, less of those awkward moments when the car just suddenly loses speed out of nowhere and puts everyone in danger, including the driver. But the bigger issue is still there. Drivers are still managing energy constantly. There's not a simple just push flat out all the time. That's something a lot of people in the paddock are still not very happy about. There's already talk about bigger changes down the line, even potentially moving back towards a simpler engine formula in the future. So Miami felt like a step in the right direction, but definitely not the final answer. So really, at the end of the day, zooming out of this one, Antonelli's the real deal, possibly a title favorite already. McLaren's still showing good fight, but strategy cost them the win. Mercedes is executing at a really high level right now, so that's something to watch as the season goes on. And the FIA changes helped, but they didn't fully fix the racing. So we'll see in the next event what happens, but if there's more coming down the pipeline from the FIA or not, we'll just know as time goes on. All right, before we get into the rest of the news this week, we do have to take a moment to acknowledge the loss of motorsports world legend Alex Zanardi. This is one of those stories that goes beyond racing because Zanardi wasn't just a driver. He was a symbol of resilience, determination, and what it really means to fight through adversity. For a lot of fans, Zanardi made his name in kart during the 1990s, and not just as a competitor, but as one of the most exciting drivers on the grid. His time with Chip Ganassi Racing is where he really became a star. Back-to-back kart championships in 97 and 98, multiple race wins, and a driving style that was aggressive, fearless, and flat-out entertaining to watch. If you go back and watch those races, he wasn't just winning, he was putting on a show the entire time. He later made a move to Formula One, and while that chapter didn't quite reach the same heights, it never really defined his career, because what came next was truly what defined Alex Zanardi. In 2001, Zanardi was involved in a devastating crash at Lasring, an accident that resulted in the loss of both of his legs, and at that point, most people would have understandably stepped away from any kind of competition. But not Zanardi. Not only did he return racing, he reinvented himself. He came back to motorsport with hand controls, competing in touring cars, and continuing to push the limits of what was possible. And if that was enough, he went on to become a Paralympic athlete, and not just a participant, but dominant. Multiple gold medals in hand cycling at the Paralympic Games, standing on the podium representing his country years after an accident that could have ended everything for him. That's why his story matters so much, because it's not just about what he did in the race car, it's about what he did after, how he responded, how he adapted, and how he refused to let circumstances define him. Zanardi showed that motorsport isn't just about speed, it's about spirit. Very few people embodied that better than he did. He leaves behind a legacy that goes far beyond wins and championships, a legacy of perverse inspiration, and a mindset that continues to impact not just racing, but people everywhere. Our thoughts are with his family and friends and everyone in motorsports community who was touched by his story. With that, I kind of wanted to go back to his kart days. Let's listen to one of his greatest finishes and remember how good he really was.
Right up behind Herta now as they come back on the Shoreline Drive one more time. 2 to go, this time by, and everyone in this crowd of 100,000 plus is on their feet. Here goes Zanardi for the lead, and he has it. Here comes Franchitti for second, as the Target Chip Ganassi Racing team goes crazy. The first time they have been in the lead since the exchange of pit stops earlier in the race. Alex Zanardi has come seemingly from nowhere to work his magic again, and he is in the lead and pulling away.
And Brian Herta has to be crushed. And Franchitti took advantage of it. He had to be right there up close and took advantage of it all.
A quick look in the mirrors for Zanardi, but he has a huge interval as the white flag waves. The victory would be worth $5,000 in donations to the St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. Last year they earned about $100,000. Did Chip Ganassi Racing and Target. There is Franchitti, who has taken over second place. Best finish ever for the Scottish driver. What a remarkable run for Alex Zanardi. I mentioned earlier in the race that the season has gotten off to a quiet start. He crashed at Motegi, Japan last Saturday. But now he has worked his way patiently through this field, through all the chaos, all the drama. Once more through the hairpin with this crowd screaming as one. He has done it again. The checkered flag waves, and Alex Zanardi back-to-back wins in Long Beach.
All right, to close things out this week, as we start to feel that Indy 500 energy building, we're going to talk about one of the most fascinating and honestly one of the most influential figures in Indianapolis 500 history, and that's Andy Granatelli. Now, if you know the name, you probably think of the STP logos, the turbine cars, and maybe one of the wildest victory lane moments a Speedway has ever seen. But Granatelli's impact on motorsports, especially the Indy 500, goes way, way deeper than that. Andy Granatelli wasn't just a team owner, he was a promoter, an innovator, and honestly a bit of a disruptor. As the head of STP, he understood something that a lot of people racing at that time didn't fully grasp yet, and motorsports wasn't just competition, it was marketing, it was entertainment, it was a spectacle, and Granatelli leaned all the way into that. He turned STP into one of the most recognizable brands in racing, plastering the red oval logo across cars, drivers, and eventually the entire Indy 500 landscape. But where Granatelli really changed the sport was innovation, and nothing represents that more than the infamous turbine cars. In 1967, Granatelli partnered with STP and brought the revolutionary STP Paxton turbo car to the Indy 500. This thing didn't run on a traditional piston engine. It ran on a turbine, basically closer to a jet engine than anything else on the grid. And the advantage is it was smooth, it was powerful, and most importantly, it was incredibly easy to drive compared to the rest of the field. Parnelli Jones led 171 of the 200 laps in that car that year. Let that sink in. He absolutely dominated the Indy 500. And then, with just 3 laps to go, the car failed. A tiny transmission bearing, and that's it. 99-cent part took the win from him on that one. But that's all that stood between Granatelli and one of the most revolutionary wins in racing history. So most people would walk away from something like that, right? Granatelli doubled down. In 1968, he came back with an evolved turbine car, the Lotus 56, this time with multiple entries, and again, they were fast. They were too fast, actually, because after that year, USAC and the sport as a whole essentially changed the rules to eliminate turbine cars from competition, and that's how disruptive his innovation was. It didn't just compete, it forced a rulebook change. Now, while the turbines didn't win, Granatelli still wasn't done reshaping the sport. He partnered with Colin Chapman and Team Lotus to bring cutting-edge technology to Indy, and in 1965, the Lotus 38, driven by Jim Clark, that won the Indianapolis 500. Now this one did win, and it changed everything. Rear-engine cars became almost standard overnight. Front-engine roadsters are gone. Just like that, the entire design philosophy of IndyCar had shifted, and Granatelli was right there in the middle of it, and we're still living that life today. But if there's one image that defines Andy Granatelli, in 1973, after years of innovation, near misses, and pushing the limits, he finally wins the Indianapolis 500. Gordon John Cock takes the victory driving for STP, and in victory lane, Granatelli runs out, grabs him, and plants a huge kiss right on him. It's chaotic, it's emotional, it's completely over the top, and it's perfect. Because that moment captured exactly who Andy Granatelli was. He was passionate, he was unapologetic, and he was larger than life. So when we talk about Granatelli's legacy, it's not just wins, it's not just cars, it's influence. He helped turn motorsports into a marketing powerhouse. He pushed innovation to the point where the rules had to change. He brought new technology, new ideas, and new energy into the Indy 500. And maybe most importantly, he made the sport feel bigger. As we head closer to this year's Indy 500, you can still see his fingerprints all over it with the branding, the innovation, the willingness to try something different, even if it breaks the mold, and that's Andy Granatelli. And honestly, the Indy 500 is better because of him and guys like him. All right, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Historic Hot Laps. You made it all the way through, especially with this packed weekend like this. You're the kind of listener we're building this show for. So here's the ask. If you want to stay dialed in every single week as we build towards Indy 500 and everything else happening across motorsports, make sure you're following the show wherever you listen. If you've got something out of this episode, send it to another person who follows racing, and let's keep this thing growing. You can also keep up with everything we're doing over at the socials, at Historic Hot Laps on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We'll be posting clips, updates, and more as we dive deeper into the biggest months of racing calendar coming up here soon. Next episode, we'll have even more Indy 500 build-up, plus everything else happening across NASCAR, Formula One, and beyond. Until then, thanks for listening to us. Hit that subscribe and like button. Stay safe. Thanks for tuning in.